We're going to talk about the disappearance of Anna Waters, which happened a long time ago.
1973.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. This was suggested by Morgan, listener. So thank you, Morgan.
Thanks, Morgan.
Probably lots of other people too, but I don't know. Anna disappeared on January 16th, 1973. She was 5 years old at the time. Anna's family history is kind of important to the story, so I guess we're going to start there a little bit. And
it's kind of a big chunk of the understanding, the theories, and what all of the thoughts on it is, so it makes sense.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we're going to start.
So it's either very relevant to the story or depending, maybe not relevant at all.
Yeah, possible.
Could be.
Yeah.
But we think it probably is.
Yeah.
That's why it's a mystery.
Yeah. Anna's mother, Michaela Benedict.
Is that how you pronounce her name? Because it confuses me every time I look at it.
So I looked up a lot of different pronunciations of this. A lot of them are Brazilian, and they're like Michaela. And
I'm sure it's not Michelle or something like that.
I don't think it could be Michelle, but I think it's Michaela.
Okay, because I was really confused every time I read it. I was like, wait, crud,
I know.
So we'll go with that.
Yeah, we're just going to pick and go. She met Anna's dad, George Waters, in college. George was he was studying to become a doctor, and shortly after they were married, they moved to the San Francisco area so that he could complete his residency. Also part of this family was Michaela's two sons from a previous maybe marriage, maybe just relationship. I don't really know the story behind that. I know they were both born in Greece. I don't think she was married to the man, so I think that George was her first husband.
So that's one of the things that I was going to ask about, because I read somewhere that George was her second husband and that she was married when she met him.
It's possible.
Yeah,
okay, I mean, this I don't know. I mean, I never found any clear answers.
And frankly, I didn't really look too far into that because I don't think it actually pertains to the story too terribly much.
Probably not too much.
You're probably right. I just easily confused, and so I was trying to figure out what was going on.
Unless the previous husband was all embittered about,
maybe, I don't think so. He was also in Greece, so
it'd be a long trip to kidnap somebody.
Yeah. They together had Anna in 1967, which was actually the same year that a man named George Brody, maybe, came into their lives. I'm unclear how George and George met. However, they became pretty instant friends.
George squared.
Yeah, that's what I've been calling them.
And did George Brody ever come by the house and meet Michaela?
I believe yes. It was a weird relationship, and we'll dive a little bit more into that.
I've heard about the relationship, yeah.
But also, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to call George Waters George and George Brody Brody.
You don't want to say George? Oh, and the other George?
The other George. It's going to get really confusing as we get into this. So.
This is like that book that I read about a monkey when I was a kid. It was so confusing with the George all the time.
George.
Got a coworker whose name is also Joe, so he's Other Joe.
Yeah.
Except for the instances when I am Other Joe.
Yeah. See, I want to just totally get above that and just go with a last name and a first name. So Brody was much older than George. Nobody really knows by how much for certain. From photos I've seen of them, I would guess that Brody was at least 20 years older than George. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah. There was definitely a generation between them.
Yeah, I was thinking it was actually even a bigger gap than that.
I think it probably was
I was thinking it was more like about 40,
I'm
35,
just being
40
generous
years,
to
Brody?
I mean, to both of them, I guess. I don't
There's nothing
know.
wrong with being friends with somebody different age than you.
No, there's not, on the face of it.
Yeah.
Their friendship was really weird. You'll see it as described as a cult of personality often, but basically Brody just became the number one most important thing to George in his life. Brody was super controlling, and George was letting him influence every single facet of his life.
This was the 70s though, and there was a lot of that going on. People were
looking for gurus.
Yes, that's exactly where I'm going. Is that there was a lot of people who said, "There's this other thing, and these people are going to tell me how to do it, and I will just do what they say." That's why the cult phenomena was so big in the 70s as well.
After the Manson murders, a lot of actually famous celebrity types were furiously backpedaling away from their relationship with Charlie Manson.
A
lot of glamorous Hollywood types were really into Charlie.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the only guru. There was a whole bunch
there were all
of them.
kinds of them out there.
It was kind of a social norm.
Yeah, the trick with this one, though, is that Brody only had this kind of relationship with George. It wasn't like...
Yeah, he
had a big
leader.
following or anything. He just had this one person.
He'd
so
only
it's a little
managed
different.
to convince one person.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Although George, at the same time, in fairness, he was having some mental issues, and so that might have, contributed something to this weird relationship.
And we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Shortly after Anna was born, Michaela and George divorced. And the number one reason you'll see cited for that was actually his relationship with Brody. But they divorced, and then Brody and George moved in together into like a really shady part of San Francisco.
Tenderloin.
Yeah, that's
they were in the Tenderloin. That's
got a little area. Yeah.
Yeah, into the kind of, I think it was a pay-by-the-month hotel room even. It
down
shared
the hall,
a bathroom down the hall. And this is interesting to know because George was a working, high-paid physician at the time. And so he could have easily afforded something better than that.
Well, he was probably paying child support and stuff,
He was, and I don't know that he was necessarily a high-paid physician, but he was a well-paid physician. I think that by saying he's high-paid, you infer that he's got a level of wealth, and he probably actually did because he was working part-time at 2 jobs.
The reason that I say he was highly paid was because Michaela's book talks about him being very well compensated.
Oh, really?
So
okay. I never got that impression from the stuff I read.
But at the very least, he could have afforded a nicer place for them to live. He was also totally financially supporting Brody. But again, they could have afforded a nicer place than this, for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
All right.
Michaela later met a man named Joseph Ford in 1971, and they got married.
So husband number 3. Maybe.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, I don't know.
Or 2. It doesn't really matter. I would have also divorced George, frankly.
Yeah.
Definitely. Joseph was, by all reports, a loving, committed father to all of Michaela's children. The family lived in Half Moon Bay in California, which is on the coast of California, just south of San Francisco.
Yeah, I've been there.
Have
nice little town.
Yeah,
It's
that's what I've heard.
Yeah, if you go start in San Mateo on the bay and just go basically due west across the peninsula, you wind up at Half Moon Bay.
Yeah, I've heard it's really nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Backstory done?
Yeah.
Yeah, backstory done.
On January 16th, Anna had been attending pre-K that morning. I don't know if everywhere this is true, but in America, I believe, most places, you do half-day pre-K.
Pre-kindergarten.
Pre-kindergarten.
For those who don't know what pre-K is.
Yeah.
Pre-K was a little pre-me. We didn't have pre-K when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People had daycare for a while, and it is a scholastic program usually. It was at the school that her older brothers were attending.
Yeah, the funny thing is that during the 70s and the 80s, I believe, school districts ran pre-K programs.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as funding began to dry up, that was shifted to other programs, sort of like Head Start was one, and now I don't know anybody that has a kid in pre-K. I'm sure that they're putting their kid in some kind of pre-kindergarten program, but I don't actually know how those are operating anymore, just because the funding in this country by state even is just city even. It's just so miss.
I was in pre-K when it was around, still run through Portland Public when I was in school here. So
that was a couple of moons ago, Tevin.
No, that was just yesterday.
That's a long
Anyway. So Anna rode the bus home. I've seen it reported as at noon, but I've also seen it reported that she got home at 1, and I cannot imagine that it was an hour-long bus ride from her pre-kindergarten class to her home. So I'm not really sure. It was midday.
They kind of lived in the sticks up that little road.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have taken an hour. You can't put a 4-year-old on a bus for an hour.
Have you ever been stuck behind a school bus? I could see it taking an hour easily.
Anyway.
I'm sorry, I grew up in the boonies. You can.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. I've seen reporting that some family friends dropped by for a visit earlier that morning.
Did these people have a job, for Christ's sakes?
I don't know.
It was the 70s, I guess.
Yeah.
Likely adult family friends.
Yeah.
So while the friends chatted with her mother and stepfather, Anna went to her room, changed her clothes, and if you really care to see what she was wearing, you can go find a description of it. And she went outside to play. It was a rainy day, but not so unpleasant that a child couldn't enjoy themselves. Around 1:30, Anna returned inside to hang up her coat, which I guess was too warm, or maybe it had stopped raining, or I don't really know why.
If you've ever worn a raincoat when it's even slightly warm outside and you're trying to run around, gross. I could see why she wouldn't.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially those old rubbery ones.
Oh, yeah.
You get as wet wearing the things as you do without them, really.
Yeah. Then she went right back outside after she returned her coat inside. And then at about 2, her mom said that she had heard Anna singing to the cats outside.
Meow, 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 meow,
And about...
meow, 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 meow,
it's a little early for that campaign.
At 2:15, she said she didn't hear Anna out there anymore, but they did have a family dog that was prone to barking at any kind of intrusion of anybody who...
It didn't know.
It didn't know, and it was a younger dog. It was more of a puppy dog.
Oh, excitedly barking instead of warning barking.
I think either, but definitely reacting to any presence other than the ones that it was used to. And the reason that I mentioned that is because it wasn't a family dog that had been left over from her marriage to George. It was a new family dog.
It did not know George.
Right.
Theoretically.
Theoretically. So since she didn't hear the dog barking, she just didn't really think anything of her not being able to hear Anna singing anymore. So at 2:20, Michaela went to call Anna to come inside, but didn't see her in the backyard anymore. So at that point, Joseph and Michaela started to search for Anna, but at about 2:45, they still hadn't found any sign of her, and they just called the cops.
Which
at that point,
terrible, because I mean, a lot of parents know this is that your kid disappears, from your view and from earshot, and you start freaking out and yelling just to find the kid looking at you like, what? I followed a bug. It's okay. That's what people just expect to be the case. So I can imagine how they'd be like, oh, God, she followed a cat again or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and 25 minutes later, you're like, oh, no, maybe she didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so, a little looking. But, and by the way, this is a kind of a rural area. It's nice also.
It's a nice, quiet area.
Yeah.
That not a lot of people who are unfamiliar, who didn't just live in the area, drove through or were in at all.
And also, by the way, no scary critters living there. I mean, there's no bears or mountain lions.
Not really.
Chupacabras.
Yeah. No, not really. Yeah. As far as we know.
Yeah.
One of the first things that the police did was to ring the tsunami siren, which is, in other places is called a tornado siren or a bomb drill or whatever.
Siren.
A siren that's meant to notify people.
So I read this as well, and I'd also read that the cop who showed up rang the siren on his car.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now that makes more sense to me, because I would think that ringing the local tsunami...
That's kind of a big step.
That's a
people are going to all evacuate.
Step to freak the entire community out. That seems above and beyond.
Have you lived in a place where those sirens are used frequently?
I've been to places, but I haven't lived there. No.
Okay, so there's a very big difference between sounding the tsunami warning one time. As a local, having lived in a place where they do that, what actual warning siren sounds like, because they just turn it on and it goes forever.
It doesn't turn back off.
Versus just, having it go and then
letting it go back down.
And then people would just be like, what? I mean, whatever.
It was a test.
Yeah, I agree. It is totally possible that actually what it actually happened was...
It just seemed an extreme step. That's all I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, it was a smaller community, so a 5-year-old wandering away.
It was the 70s.
They just I think they really did think she had just wandered away, and if they could just raise a siren, she would come back. I'm
trying to think about the irony, though, that they actually blasted the tsunami alert and everything, and to look for to save this little 5-year-old girl. In the meantime, 2 or 3 other 5-year-old kids get trampled, by all the people evacuating.
This is why you don't just randomly blare those horns.
Well, exactly.
We're off topic already.
Oh, totally. That's okay.
Anyway, if you haven't already guessed, whatever siren sounded did not bring Anna running. So we haven't mentioned this yet, but there was what's referred to as a creek that was running along the back edge of their property.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It sounds like it was a really strong creek
at that time.
Yeah. But they decided that seemed like a thing that was really dangerous, and they decided to converge their search on the creek.
Well, if this is January, that's the middle of winter. I grew up next to a teeny tiny little creek that in January was a raging torrent.
Yeah.
So I can, and what I know in a summertime creek was something that I could take 3 big steps and cross. In the wintertime, I would never even dare to go near it. So I can see why they would say, if it's that kind of scenario, I can see why they would immediately be like, oh, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, it was in a flooding stage at that time. And Michaela has said time and time again that she always felt like that creek was a danger to her family, but, it was a nice house.
Actually,
houses are expensive.
A lot of people would love to have a creek running through their property.
I think it was kind of a love-hate relationship with that creek for her, where she thought, I really like having it running through my property, but also I have a 5-year-old, and when it floods, she could easily fall in and drown. And that seems to be exactly what they thought had actually happened to Anna.
Not an unreasonable conclusion.
Totally understandable.
Yeah, I agree. They actually thought it was so strong that she could have drowned and washed away, not just drowned.
It was only like 2 or 3 miles to the ocean.
And washed downstream.
From their property.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, it kind of snakes around a little bit, goes under highway 1 through a culvert, not a bridge, so she would have probably gotten hung up somewhere.
Right, and that was the hope. They actually did send divers down.
Yeah, and also, by the way, it dumps out onto a beach. It doesn't just, flow out of a cliff into the ocean, right? So,
yeah. Her body would likely have been found had this happened, but
I think so.
Again, that's a little more theories. Like I said, divers were sent down, so that's how deep it was that you'd have divers go down into this creek, apparently.
I'm guessing they were hanging on to ropes.
Yeah, I would guess that. But they didn't find anything, which was kind of a bummer. And actually, I've seen it said that this was one of the most extensive searches that's ever happened in California coast or something like that. Some neighbors came forward a couple days later and said that they had actually seen a white paneled truck with 2 men, one much younger than the other, drive along a normally otherwise very quiet road.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That nobody ever really drove on except for locals.
Yeah, if you look at it on the aerial, it's not a throughway from one place to another. It goes up and it sort of dead ends into another snaky little road that snakes off in a different direction.
Yeah.
It's not a shortcut between any 2 places at all.
It's not. And it's also not. It's not the kind of place you just kind of get lost going. I have a problem with this. It was a couple days later. They didn't really know exactly what time they saw this truck, if it was indeed that afternoon, if it was much later that afternoon, if it was earlier that morning, if it was even early on that day.
Maybe not even the same day. Were they sure it was the same day?
I don't know. Yeah, and then the other part of that was, they always say there's 2 men, one was much older than the other, but I've never ever seen somebody say, like, one of them was 20 and the other was 60. It's always just been like, I don't know, one was way older than the other.
And we know how friggin' subjective that is. Me today, sitting in a truck next to me about 2 months ago with the full-on beard.
Yeah.
There's a massive age difference in appearance.
That's a good point.
you could literally have one guy with a beard and one guy without, and they're the same age, and you'd have no idea, especially in a moving vehicle.
Yeah.
These kind of details...
It's, people are grasping at straws, but it looks to me like this is a classic plumber apprentice situation. So I'm going to dismiss
it was Mario and Luigi.
Yeah.
They're the same age. Well, I guess they're not. They're brothers. They're close to the same age.
Yeah, but that mustache makes Mario. Turns out they also had different fathers, so that helps.
That's true. There's more to this story, but I kind of want to dig into that as we dig into theories. Is that okay with you guys?
Sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, cool. So I guess we'll talk about theories. But first, let's take a quick break.
If an ogre with a club shows up at your house, you're in big trouble. Because for one, I didn't know ogres were real, and if they are, then that means we live in a fantasy land, and there's magic, and there's all these other crazy things, and oh my god, it's really scary to think about. Don't think about that stuff at all. But in the real world, there are actual scary things, and they don't have to be so scary, which is why I'm a big fan of Simply Safe Home Security. SimpliSafe is just always ready for anything that gets thrown at it. If a storm takes out your power, SimpliSafe is ready. If an intruder cuts your phone line, they're ready. Say that intruder destroys your keypad or your siren, SimpliSafe will still get you the help you need. And here's what I love about it. Maybe it's overkill. Maybe you don't really need to be ready for every worst case scenario. Personally, I kind of am because I expect the apocalypse, but I'm weird that way. But the great thing is, SimpliSafe is just